G'day, g'day. Thanks for having me. Um, yeah, so some of you might know I've been doing and have done parkour for a long time now. I think I started in like 2007 or something. But I've also been working as an arborist for the last 7 years or so. So it kind of gives me a good kind of crossover between both to kind of explain what we should and could be looking out for when doing a bit of tree climbing. You've given me a couple of questions to go with, which is really helpful. And yeah, as Kel said, if there's any other questions that anyone wants to know, drop them down because it helps me kind of find out what you're actually interested in. So I'll make my way through some of the questions to start with, maybe some that don't need screen sharing to start with, and then I can just screen share and just do all of that later. So a good one is, what harm can tree climbing do to the tree? So it really depends on the tree, but all trees have a cambium layer, which is just underneath the bark layer. So the cambium layer is the layer that kind of shuttles water up to the leaves, like from the roots up to the leaves. And it also shuttles the sugars from the leaves down to the roots. So if we damage that cambium layer, say if we jump to it and we scuff off that piece of bark and damage the cambium layer underneath, the tree has that little bit less kind of piping to actually get what it needs. So that's mainly what we want to avoid. That's the main thing that we want to avoid. A good way to avoid that is, one, have good technique and land softly, land exactly where you want to be, and try not to have any forward momentum to like rip off the bark. And two is, know your tree species. And some tree species will have a rougher bark and a thicker bark. What that thicker bark does is essentially dampens the impact from your jump from the bark to the cambium. So say you're climbing an oak, that will have a much thicker bark, and the impact of you jumping will be way less than if you were jumping to a eucalypt, which usually has a thin bark, a thin layer. So in sticking with that cambium kind of theme, there's another question about when should you be jumping, or when should you avoid jumping? Ideally, unfortunately, spring is when we want to kind of avoid jumping on those thinner layered trees, because that's the time when they're piping up and down the most amount of water and nutrients, and when it needs it the most, and also when the bark is at its freshest. Each kind of year, most trees will kind of shed the layer of bark. So spring and summer is when mainly spring is when they will have shed or shedding, and the cambium layer will be extra sensitive. So yeah, you kind of want to avoid the thin barked trees when you're doing it at that time of year. So there's another one of, how can I protect the tree if I'm hanging like a slack line or a gymnastics rings or hammocks or whatever? And again, that goes back to the bark. It's really about protecting the cambium. A lot of, say with slacklining, a lot of slacklining kits will give you tree guards, which is just basically just a piece of cloth that you wrap around whatever you're going to wrap, like the trunk or the stem, and all that does is soften the impact on the cambium. So yeah, kind of just an extra layer of protection. So if you've got a jumper, chuck that over whatever limb you're hanging your rings off, and then put your rings on, and that will help the tree. But again, if it's an oak or a camphor laurel or a thick bark tree, you don't really have to worry. Yeah, I've hung ropes on and gymnastic rings on oaks and camphor laurels with no protection, and they're fine. Camphor laurels, this also comes to knowing your tree species. Like camphor laurel is incidentally my favorite tree. It's the active ingredient in tiger balm. So you crush up the leaves and it smells like tiger balm. It's amazing. But they're really vigorous tree, and you can pretty much do whatever you want to them. So it doesn't really matter. So done the seasons. So there's a question about how to identify habitats. Like, say if you're climbing a tree and you're trying to look out for possums, birds, whatever. In general, possums and birds will, especially Australian natives, will nest in hollows. So if the tree's got a large hollow, you probably don't want to be climbing it anyway. But yeah, generally they'll nest in hollows. Otherwise, like crows and magpies, you can see their nests fairly plainly. You don't really have to worry too much about all that. And if you do stumble upon a possum or a crow or whatever, they'll let you know. I've run into a couple of possums while climbing, and yeah, they definitely let you know. Yeah. So in terms of climbing trees, in general, if you haven't climbed that tree before, I find the most fun way to climb the tree is to do some deadwooding. So deadwooding is basically removing the dead branches from within the canopy. So you'll know if it's a dead branch by the color of it. It'll be essentially brown or black or gray. And if you put a bit of weight on it, it should just snap off. It shouldn't peel. So say an oak, everyone knows what an oak is. In an English oak tree, if you get up in it, the first thing and you're going to climb around, the first thing you should try to do is remove the dead branches. One, because it's generally better for the tree. They're going to fall down anyway, and you're actually reducing a potential hazard for the future. At least if you're doing it and there's no one underneath you, you know that branch is going to be it's going to come down when you want it to come down, not when you don't. And also cleaning up the internal structure of the tree makes it a lot easier and a lot more fun to get around the tree. So there's a few, that's probably the main one that I really like doing. I might chuck my screen share on and I'll show you a couple of download the whole Instagram. Not what I want. Here we go. So this is a camphor laurel. Can you see that's on the screen?
It's still small on my screen. Still a thumbnail on my screen.
Any better?
Nope, not yet. Hang on, let me. No, still thumbnails here.
Now?
Unfortunately, still got the still just the
All that crap.
yeah,
That's
still
right.
just the folder view.
That's right. Get out of that. Well, maybe I'll ignore that for now. Generally, you'll be able to recognize deadwood fairly easily. It's clearly a different feel to the rest of the branches. It'll be more rigid. It won't bend, and if you give it a good shake, it should snap rather than bend. If it doesn't snap, if it bends, leave it be. It's not ready to come off. The tree hasn't compartmentalized enough, or it hasn't drawn enough nutrients from that branch back into itself and really kind of sealed it off. If you rip it off before it's ready, you're doing a little bit more harm than you should be. Is it good to also remove dead hanging bark strips while climbing? Bark strips, it doesn't really affect it either way. You can, if it's annoying you, just remove it. If not, probably just leave it. It'll come off when it's ready. But if it's annoying you, just flick it out of the way. So try share screen again, and I'll get into some of the pictures. All right, has that worked?
No.
Oh, God damn.
Was this on your Instagram? Because I could probably share my screen of your Instagram.
I've got a lot of other photos that are just on my computer.
I wonder why it's not.
Let's just go extra large icons.
Yeah, nice one.
So let's try this. So this is something you really have to watch out for. That's a bracket fungi. So that type of fungus, it mainly occurs in eucalypts, but will occur in pretty much any other tree. That type of fungus makes everything up and down way more structurally weak. So if you're climbing above that, basically just don't climb above that. Because there's a high chance that it'll end up like this one and it'll just snap out the top. So this is what the bracket fungi does. All the inside of that tree has been kind of eaten away and decayed, and essentially it's been turned into a sponge. So that inside of this tree is that tree. So from the outside, you can't actually tell what's been going on. But yeah, you'll have to look for basically signs of these kind of fungal brackets. And if it's got them, probably best to avoid it or be extra careful around it. Another thing that you have to look for is basically the structure of the tree. The structure of the tree is probably one of the most important things to look for when climbing the tree. So with this one, this green picture, if you can see the kind of browning on the main stem, and it's got a very tight union. If there's a tree with a tight union, generally it's going to be more likely to fail. So you don't really want to climb out too high on a tree, on a branch that's got a tight union. say if I was climbing up this tree, it's quite a big tree. Say if I was climbing up onto the right of this tree, where my arrow is, where my cursor is, it's got a higher chance of failure than if that wasn't there and if the tight union was a little bit more open. So just another thing to kind of look out for, because yeah, you don't really want to be climbing on already structurally weak trees, because you've got a higher chance of it ripping out on you, doing the tree damage and also yourself. And some species are just notorious for having that type of structure. Like the one next to it is a pear, like a Caloriana pear, and it's just I reckon it's the worst tree in general, but it's planted everywhere in Melbourne, absolutely everywhere. And they've just got the tightest union, and the bark grows on the inside, like the inside of the union. So trees have to grow. So if there's already bark on the inside and it has to put another ring on, it will push itself apart eventually. So that's where we're looking for those crappy unions. That's another example of a tight union, another tight union. Basically, if it's a nice open union with no real visible kind of defects like that browning on the sides, go for it. You shouldn't really have an issue. Another thing to look for is basically wood that's adapted to some kind of stress. So this is adaptive growth, and that kind of the widening of the base of the stem, the widening of the tree, tells you that something's going on there. It's trying to compensate for a weakness. And if you climb above that, you're just going to be adding to that kind of weakness, and it may not be able to compensate as much as you need it to. So in general, best to kind of avoid climbing on those. Same with this one. This one's a really good indication, because that stem should be the same width as the top all the way down, but it's nearly doubled. So that's going to, I wouldn't be surprised. I took this picture a while ago, probably like a couple of years, 2018. I wouldn't be surprised if that's ripped out by now. It just kind of fallen, teared itself apart.
Can I jump in with a couple of quick questions there?
Yeah, go for it.
Could you, this is from Eden, could you just tell us what a union is in a tree?
Oh, yep, cool. So a union is where a branch meets the main stem. So you come up, so I'll go back to a picture. I work best with pictures. So let's go with this one. So that the very bottom where my arrow is the main stem. This is the branch. Where that branch meets that main stem, that's the union, where they unite essentially. And the next branch, where that meets the main stem, that's also a union. So the bottom right-hand branch and union is far worse than the top left-hand union. You can see the kind of browning off, the kind of deeper ridge line, and yeah, it's kind of just sort of included in the main stem rather than separate from it. And that's what kind of what we want to be looking out for when we're climbing. We don't want the branch to be included in the main stem. It should be a definite set aside. It should be a branch rather than kind of the same.
Can I ask a follow-up there? If there's a sub-branch coming off a branch rather than the main stem, is that also a union? And do the same things apply there?
Yeah, yeah, that's also a union, and yeah, exactly the same things apply. You kind of want, yeah, the opened angle, wideish angle, and you don't want to see a kind of a line down where the union and the stem, like the branch and the stem meet.
Yeah.
Because that will usually indicate, not always, but usually indicate a bit of weakness or a bit of included bark, which can lead to weakness.
Great. And can I ask one question from me this time? When you said the adaptive growth is a response to stress, I assume that could be any number of things from parasites to bad weather, or is it a particular type of stress that leads to that growth?
Adaptive growth is a general term that will lead to basically any type of stress, but these top two in particular are a specific type of adaptive growth. So these top two are in response to included bark. So that's bark in the union between the main stem and the branch, or two stems. And because that bark can't go anywhere and the tree has to keep on growing, it will eventually push itself out. But in the meantime, it's trying to hold itself together. And that's what the outer edges, that kind of widening and thickening of the main stem is. It's trying to hold itself together. But eventually, given enough time and giving it enough growth and other inputs, it's going to fail. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you. I've just got another couple of questions from Eden here, which should we save those to the end, or should I throw them at you now?
I can't see the questions, but yeah, throw them.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Okay,
I probably can. I think I have to stop sharing my screen to do it.
Of course, yeah. So one of them goes back to how you were speaking about bark before. So the question is, when you have a branch that looks really worn and smooth from other people climbing on a lot, how do you know if it's gone through the bark to that cambium layer, or is that the sort of thing you should just assume is damaged?
In general, it will be damaged. But again, if you have a closer look at that branch, you may see it's starting to adapt to that growth or adapt to that kind of stress. Say if the top of the limb is worn out and smooth, more than likely the sides and the bottom will kind of be growing out a bit more than the top. If it is growing out more, that's fine. The tree's adapting. It's going to kind of keep on growing as per normal. It will have affected the top layer of that cambium, the most kind of vertical layer of the cambium, but potentially the damage is already done. So just have fun.
Yeah. Just another couple of questions. One is, eucalyptus trees have a reputation for randomly dropping limbs. Is that true?
Sort of. Some eucalypts do. A lot of them don't. There's over like 1,000 eucalypt species, and of them, maybe 5, 10 randomly drop their limbs. But they do that in response to weather. Like usually it's an environmental factor that causes that. Say no one's really got a definite answer for it, but one of my theories is that if it usually happens on a really hot day, like a hot, dry day. So one of my theories is that on those days, there's not enough water in the ground, and as the tree is transpiring and putting out water through its leaves, if there's not enough water in the ground, I think that during that time, because in the tree, there's a number of atmospheres different than the outside. atmospheres in the tree is, I can't remember the exact number, but it's like 10 atmospheres difference. And I think potentially when that line of water is interrupted, those atmospheres kind of just pop, and that pressure has to be off-gassed somewhere. So more than likely it's environmental, in my opinion anyway, but no one's really found out why that happens. But that also happens in other species of trees. It's not just eucalypts. Other species will just drop limbs as well. But yeah.
Can I pop in with a quick question about that difference in bark thickness that you talked about? Are most Australian natives towards the thinner bark side of things? Yeah,
most of them. Well, a lot of them, yeah. Some of them, like the paperbark tree, is really, really thick bark, and it's essentially paper, like layers and layers and layers of paper. In saying that, you wouldn't really want to climb a paperbark tree because they're pretty crap climbing. But yeah, not all of them are thin barked.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, you'll be able to see, like you'll just be able to go up and feel it, and it'll be fairly obvious.
Right.
Any other questions from the other people?
Yes, we do have a couple actually. So one is, when do we know when a tree is too small or too young to climb on? And is there a general trunk diameter that we should be looking for?
Not really, to be honest. You've got to kind of feel it out. So most trees, if the trunk's not as thick as your forearm, probably don't even bother. In saying that, crepe myrtles, which are fairly well planted, they can have a trunk as thick as my forearm, but the wood on them is incredibly strong. Like I can swing around them with no issues. But say if I did the same thing on the pear, like what I've got my pointer on, it would snap in a millisecond. It again comes down to kind of knowing the tree. The best thing to do is go up to the tree, try bend it a little bit. You'll feel it either give you a fair bit of resistance, or it will bend and you might hear slight popping. That's the fibers kind of giving out. Leave it. Don't go near it again. Let it kind of recover from that and find another tree. If it doesn't and you can hang off it, sweet, go for it. Like generally the tree will dictate what you can and can't do.
Great.
And it is good to, like, if you've got, well, yeah, everyone's got a smartphone. If you've got a smartphone, there's a few apps that you can kind of point your camera at it, click it, and the app will identify what that plant is. And the quick Google search will kind of give you kind of relative, or like strengths of trees and stuff. But the best thing to do is just kind of give it a tug, give it a feel. Yeah, it will tell you if you can climb or not.
Great, excellent answer. I like that better than taking a tape measure for the diameter.
Yeah, nobody got time for that.
Nobody got time for that. And another question from Eden: are lichens and moss that grow on the surface of a tree important to trees, to their health?
In the most part, no. They're usually kind of a standalone feature. They just inhabit the tree. They don't actually give or take anything from it. For the most part, there are some parasitic plants that feed on trees, but in general, you won't really encounter them. The only thing you'd have to look for is that's living on a tree is, like I said, the bracket fungi. Yeah, that is definitely something to look for and will parasitize a tree. There are a lot of other different types of fungi that do parasitize trees, but that's the most common in Australia. Yeah.
Great. I've just got one question from Isaac here. How should we respect exposed roots when climbing trees?
Again, depends on the tree. Like, I'm assuming you're talking about a fig tree, because they've got the most kind of known exposed roots. Jump on them. They're friggin' awesome to jump on. Their figs are basically indestructible, so you can do pretty much whatever you want to them. Plus, they're the most fun tree to get around in. Yeah, the figs are probably one of my go-to trees, because there's always options to climb, always options to jump, and they're so vigorous that they'll put up with a lot of kind of bruising and damage. That they'll just outcompete whatever damage you do to it. And in general, the damage will be pretty minimal. They're bloody hardy. Yeah. In general, you're fine to jump on roots, as long as if you see that you have been jumping and you're taking the top layer of bark off and getting to the cambium, leave it for a while. Don't jump on that tree. If you're not, keep going.
Great. Excellent.
You've got a question here. What should I do if I break a branch? Which is a good one to consider, because oftentimes, or not often, ideally none, but sometimes we do break branches. The best thing to do would be call the council. You don't have to say it was you. Just ideally call the council. If the branch is fully broken off, they'll come and clean it up, and ideally kind of prune back to a branch collar or the branch bark ridge, which is where the tree naturally kind of wants to heal from. Well, not heal, but trees don't technically heal. They just grow over. But generally an arborist will come out and prune to where it's advantageous for the tree to kind of keep going from. Just say the branch was on the ground, or you noticed a hanging branch. That's all you need.
Can I ask a wee follow-up question there? When it comes to the deadwooding that you were talking about before,
yep.
Knocking the dead branches off before you start climbing, so long as they're pretty small, is it best to just leave them to contribute to the leaf litter and whatnot underneath, or is it best to take those and put them in a rubbish bin or something?
I'll try to get to my... Can you see what like my web page now?
No, unfortunately it's still on your... what I'll do, I'll claim the screen back and see if giving it to you again helps. Okay. All right. Oh, unfortunately, it's still the folder view.
Right. In general,
but if it's a website, I could share it from this end.
Yeah. Okay. In general, the best thing to do would just be, once you've done all the deadwooding, get down on the ground. I use the climbing, the deadwooding. I have an actual kind of format that I like to follow when I'm going out and doing just tree climbing. I'll find a nice tree, fairly small to medium-sized tree, lots of different options to kind of go around in. First, I'll get up in it and deadwood it, and just use that as a mobility kind of strength exercise. See what as far as I can reach, extend my range of motion, get low, try go high, all that kind of movement stuff. Do all the deadwooding, and then have a fun play around once the tree's completely deadwooded, and then get down on the ground and do all my quadrupedal kind of and low gait movement, and just get down on the ground, stay low or stay in quadrupedal, and bunch all the dead wood up, just put them into different piles, and then once they're all in piles, I'll just stand up and form one big pile and put it then next to the tree. And eventually someone will come and clean that up. Some arborist or council worker will come clean that up.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great system.
Yeah, it seems to work and keeps everyone happy. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, there's a lot of times you can report online, which is perfect. Don't even have to give the call. Even better.
Excellent. For everyone who's watching from Facebook, Eden just provided a link for ways to report damaged trees to councils, and I'll pop that link in the WamJam event as well. Thank you, Eden.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a good fun one here, actually.
Go for it.
Isaac has asked, do you know any good fig trees around Melbourne?
Oh, do I? Oh, do I? Yes, I do. I'll get Google up and I'll get my list of trees to climb. I've got a list of trees to climb in Melbourne. I'll see if I can find that.
What a fantastic resource to make.
Yeah, it helps me kind of keep track of them all. There are some that are better than others, and obviously you want to kind of save them. Where's my lists? Oh, I found my lists. There you go, saved. Trees in Vic. Oh, that'll be the new ones.
For everyone who's watching who did see Ali's presentation on mapping for parkour, we have made a Victorian parkour map, or started to, and I think now we're going to have to add an extra layer for climbing trees, or more information about tree climbing, because this is very exciting to hear about.
There is this one tree, but I'm not going to share that one because that's actually no, is that the one I'm thinking of? Hello Botanic Gardens. Yeah, that one is it. All right, so if people want to Google Renfrey Gardens, RENFREY Gardens.
I've just written that in the chat.
Awesome. And there's a big old fig tree in there. Good different kind of canopy layers that you can jump in, and really widespread. Is like low, medium, and very, very high. Yes. There's also, I'll try screen share again because I'll give you a couple of parks that I've already, like where I used to live, that I've already kind of gone around deadwooded and kind of created pretty much the ideal trees to climb around in. So you can just rock up there and be ready to go. Riversdale Park, which is on Riversdale Road. These are both in kind of Camberwelly area, so eastern suburbs. I'll try screen share again. Oh, you zombie. Can you see my thing now?
Yes.
Like, actually,
yep.
That's how you do it. All right. Rivers. So this is on, Riversdale Park on Riversdale Road in Camberwell, right near Riversdale Railway Station if you want to get there. So there's some good jumps around here. There's also a school up here with some fun jumps. But the trees, there's an oak here, fairly small oak, but the young to medium oaks are actually the funnest to climb. The big oaks, they have less options. This small medium oaks is more of a kind of a general movement session, where you can actually just work on strength, mobility, transitions, all that kind of stuff. Let's see if I can, I know. And then there's an acacia over here, which is good for more larger jumps. You can kind of run around in it, jump, transition, all that kind of stuff. Another camphor laurel over here, again, semi-medium jumps. And Lophostomen down here, again, just good to kind of shuffle around in, really stretch out. Let's see if I can do street view.
Can I ask a quick question while you're doing that?
Yeah, go for it.
I think what I have always thought of a lot of the fig trees that I climb on as a Moreton Bay fig,
Yep.
Are they all that same, the sort of best climbing tree that I'm thinking of? Are they all likely to be Moreton Bay figs, or are there several species of fig trees?
There's several species. Well, there's a whole bunch of different species of fig, but the most of the ones that you can actually find in Melbourne are Moreton Bays. Yeah.
Yeah.
The rest, yeah, not so much. Like when you go up to Queensland, however, or New South Wales, that will change. They won't necessarily be Moreton Bays. Some of the other ones have better kind of root structures to play on rather than in the tree. They've got those really vertical roots, almost like walls.
Yeah.
And that's not a Moreton Bay. That's another type. I can't remember its botanical name.
Yeah.
But yeah, most of the time Moreton Bays are the ones that we're going to be jumping around on. Oh, what's going on there? And the other good park is Rathmines Reserve, which was my main park. There's a really big oak tree here. That's more kind of larger jumps and a bit of fear training. Couple good eucalypts here, more semi-medium large jumps. Camphor laurel in here, a bit of fear training, just general movement. And all up in here is just general movement. And this playground's pretty fun to jump around into. But,
excellent.
Yeah. I'll go back to the questions, see if there's anything I've missed that we kind of should touch on. Break a branch, call to cancel. No, that's pretty much all of it.
Excellent. That's been super informative. I might just throw a couple of quick questions at you, and if anyone's got more questions, please pop them in the chat here or on the Facebook stream. But one I want to ask you about is you as a parkour practitioner and as an arborist have a really good knowledge about how we have to protect and prepare our own bodies through strengthening mobility work. And you talked about having a kind of process before you climb trees. So what are your I don't know, your desert. No, that's a bad way of putting it. But what are some things that we need to think about through climbing trees? We've talked about protecting the trees, but to protect ourselves as well from potential injury.
Yeah. So the main thing with any type of climbing is try to have 3 points of contact. Either 2 feet and 1 arm or 2 arms, 1 foot, doesn't really matter. And where possible, minimize 2 points of contact. Unless you're doing a jump or a swing and you know that's what you're doing. But yeah, 3 points of contact. If you're starting out in a tree and just climbing around, the best thing is use the climb as a warm-up. So go for 3 points of contact the whole time and make it a challenge for yourself. So make sure you can only get to X from Y with 3 points of contact. Means you're going to have to stretch and really get into some odd shapes. It's kind of challenging itself, and you can do that just from the tree. You go vertically and go in columns. You select like a column of the tree and see if you can do it. Go to another column, see if you can do it, and then you can corkscrew up or corkscrew back down, or you can just kind of pick a level and just do that level and then get increased pace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent advice. Thank you. That's very important for everyone. If you walk away from this only remembering one thing, 3 points of contact is a good one.
Yeah.
And we've got a question here from Eden. You mentioned that pear trees and paperbark trees are generally pretty crap for climbing. What are your other crap climbing species?
Cool. So ash and elders are generally, they're like structurally they're quite good to climb, but they're real snappy. They don't give you much warning either. If you get too far out, it won't let you know before it lets go, essentially. They're kind of ones that should be avoided. The rest, nothing really else springs to mind. Oh, birch. Birch can be a bit iffy, just because a lot of birch have some form of white rot, so some form of fungal decay, and anytime they get it really bad. If the birch has a top that's been taken off, there's going to be decay from that top a fair way down. So when removing trees, I've removed birch, and in my climbing harness and spurs, I've put my pole belt around and tried to spur up the tree, literally stepped through the tree. So from the outside, you can be like, oh yeah, that's a pretty shit tree, or no, that looks pretty good. But once you're in it, you just don't know. So birches, if it looks like it's struggling, just avoid it. Oh yeah, that's probably another thing we should talk about. Like if a tree looks like it's struggling, like if it doesn't have much foliage, just leave it be. It needs time and sugars and a bit of space to recover. If it's got a really nice full canopy and looks like it's going gangbusters, go for it. Like that was the reason why I was saying, no, I won't tell you about this tree. There's a fig in St Kilda. Probably most people know it. It's really central. It's an awesome tree to climb, amazing tree to climb, but it is struggling. So climbing on it is going to do it a lot of harm. And really, unless something's done to help it, it's probably going to kick the bucket fairly soon, unfortunately. But yeah.
Could I ask a quick follow-up to that? Does that extend to avoiding trees that have dropped their canopy entirely for the season? Or
No. So that's just a kind of normal cycle. Yeah, no, if it's just dropping its canopy, go for it. But if it's an evergreen and it's got a really thin canopy and kind of patchy, probably it needs time to actually heal and a bit of space.
Great. I've got a question here from Isaac, Isaac, correct me if I'm wrong, I think is looking for a bit of technique advice, but what's your advice for climbing large pine trees with the blocky kind of bark? And Isaac, again, jump in if I'm misinterpreting you here, but I assume you mean the stuff with thick ridges in it?
It depends if he means it's like rock climbing, because you can sometimes do that depending on the tree. But in general, if it's the big blocky bark and it's just like parkour climbing, usually they're fine. Like pines, they can kind of scale off. You've just got to be a bit more mindful of it, really. In general, it's more just stuff to look out for with those trees. Yeah. So in general, you've just got to be a bit more mindful of your technique, because those scales can kind of just shear off, but most of the times they won't. Yeah.
Great. If we're all out of questions here, we'll probably wind up pretty soon. One thing that would be good is you mentioned several times the importance of knowing your trees and getting a familiarity with species of trees. Yep. So what I'll do is I'll start a chat in the WamJam group and compile information on the apps you can use for that, or the resources that are good for that. So that's something great to include in your training when you go out. You can test yourself on tree species knowledge, I suppose.
Yep.
And is there any more information you'd like to add, Kyle, regarding what you're working on at the moment? Any social media links you want to share, or anything, any follow-up info?
No, not too much, really. No, I'm not really doing a whole lot of, mainly working on my tree business at the moment. So,
right. And
most of my attention's going.
Yeah, you're located in where now?
Moved to Koroit, which is the southwest Victoria.
Okay, so anyone in that area who needs an arborist, you know where to look now.
Or wants to jump.
Oh, yeah.
Not much